What if the secret to your healthiest garden isn't just about what you plant, but what you feed the soil? We're diving deep into a fascinating showdown: wheat versus flour versus rice. Prepare to discover which common starch is the ultimate feast for your soil's microbial army, unlocking explosive plant growth you've only dreamed of. The invisible garden. Why microbes matter. When you look at your garden soil, you might see nothing more than brown earth, but beneath that surface lies an entire universe of life more complex than any ecosystem above ground. Every teaspoon of healthy soil contains more microorganisms than there are people on Earth, and these tiny creatures are the unsung heroes responsible for transforming your garden from mediocre to magnificent. Think of your soil not as inert matter, but as a thriving metropolis, where billions of microscopic workers are constantly breaking down organic matter, cycling nutrients, and creating the very foundation that allows your plants to thrive. At the heart of this underground city are three rockstar groups of microorganisms that deserve your attention and respect. Fungi are the master decomposers and nutrient highways of the soil, sending out vast networks of thread-like hyphae that can extend for miles in a single handful of earth. These fungal networks don't just break down tough organic materials like cellulose and lignin, they also form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, effectively extending your plant's reach for water and nutrients by hundreds of times. Bacteria are the rapid responders and nutrient cyclers, reproducing at lightning speed when food becomes available and quickly converting complex organic compounds into forms that plants can actually absorb and use. Then we have protozoa, the tiny predators that feed on bacteria and fungi, releasing locked-up nitrogen and other nutrients in a form that plants love, essentially acting as the soil's natural fertilizer factories. Understanding and nurturing this microbial activity can completely revolutionize your garden from the ground up. When you feed your soil microbes properly, you're not just adding fertility, you're building a self-sustaining system that improves year after year. Healthy microbial populations suppress disease organisms, improve soil structure, increase water retention, and create a nutrient buffet that feeds your plants exactly what they need, exactly when they need it. The question then becomes, what's the best way to feed these microscopic helpers? To truly understand which common household starch creates the most explosive microbial growth, we need to approach this with the precision of a scientist but the curiosity of a gardener. For this experiment, we're comparing whole wheat grains, all-purpose wheat flour, and white rice, each representing different levels of processing and nutrient complexity. The setup is straightforward, but requires attention to detail. We're using equal weights of each starch, mixed with the same amount of water and a standardized soil inoculum to ensure we're truly comparing apples to apples, or rather, starches to starches. The visual differences between these three starches tell a story before we even begin. Whole wheat grains are intact kernels containing the bran, germ, and endosperm, making them a complete package of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals. When you hold them in your hand, you're holding everything a wheat plant invested into creating the next generation. All-purpose flour is more processed, with the bran and germ removed, leaving primarily the starchy endosperm ground into a fine powder that dissolves relatively easily in water. White rice sits somewhere in between, being a whole grain that's been polished to remove the outer layers, leaving mostly starch with some protein remaining in the grain structure. Our hypothesis going into this experiment is that whole wheat will stimulate the most diverse and sustained microbial activity because it offers the broadest spectrum of nutrients. Flour should show the fastest initial response because its fine particle size makes it immediately accessible to microbes, like setting out a buffet where everything is already bite-sized. Rice might take longer to get going because, well, microbes need to work harder to break down those intact grains, but once they do, it could support sustained growth. Let's see if our predictions hold up. The transformation that occurs over the following weeks is nothing short of magical, if you know what to look for. Within the first 48 hours, the flour mixture shows the most dramatic change, developing a slightly sour smell characteristic of rapid bacterial fermentation. The fine particles have already begun to break down, and if you look closely, you might see the first wispy signs of fungal growth beginning to appear on the surface. By the end of week 1, the whole wheat mixture starts to catch up in spectacular fashion, the grains begin to soften and split, and a robust fungal network starts to weave through the mixture, creating visible white threads that connect grain to grain. The smell becomes earthy and rich rather than sharp, indicating that both bacteria and fungi are working in concert. The rice mixture, meanwhile, shows slower but steady progress, with the grains gradually softening and beginning to fragment as microbial enzymes work their way into the starch granules. As we move into weeks 2 and 3, the differences become even more pronounced. The flour mixture, having been consumed rapidly, begins to quiet down, with activity levels stabilizing and even declining slightly because the most easily accessible food has been depleted. The whole wheat mixture hits its stride during this period, showing explosive growth of both fungal hyphae and bacterial colonies, creating a complex ecosystem that you can actually see transforming the material into something resembling rich compost. The rice continues its slow and steady transformation, with persistent microbial activity that seems to sustain itself longer than the flour, but without quite reaching the intensity of the wheat. When we analyze the results through both observation and basic testing, a clear winner emerges. Though each starch has its own interesting story to tell, the whole wheat stimulated the highest levels of sustained microbial activity, creating the most diverse community of organisms, and transforming most completely into rich, soil-like material. Using simple carbon dioxide respiration tests, we can measure that the wheat mixture is producing significantly more metabolic activity than the others throughout the entire experimental period, indicating a thriving and active microbial population. The reason for wheat's superior performance lies in its chemical composition and structure. Whole wheat contains not just starch but also proteins, lipids, B vitamins, minerals like phosphorus and magnesium, and importantly, fiber in the form of the bran coating. This diversity means that different microbial species can specialize in breaking down different components, leading to a more complex and resilient community. The fungi work on the tough bran and germ oils, while bacteria tackle the simpler starches and proteins, and this division of labor creates a more sustainable ecosystem. The flour, while generating rapid initial activity, essentially offered fast food to the microbes, lots of quick energy but not much nutritional diversity to support long-term population growth. The implications for plant health are significant. Wheat-based amendments would be ideal for jump-starting microbial activity in depleted soils or for feeding heavy-feeding crops during their active growing season. The diverse microbial community stimulated by wheat excels at nutrient cycling, making locked-up nutrients available to plants while improving soil structure through fungal networks and bacterial exudates. So, how do you translate these findings into real-world gardening success? The key is understanding that you're not just adding organic matter to your soil, you're actively feeding a living community that will, in turn, feed your plants. For most gardeners, incorporating whole grains like wheat or barley into your composting system will supercharge the decomposition process and create a more biologically active finished product. You can add a handful of whole wheat to each layer of your compost pile, or if you're doing vermicompost, sprinkle some ground wheat into your worm bins every few weeks as a supplemental food source that will boost microbial activity before the worms consume it. For direct soil application, you can create what I call a microbe starter by mixing crushed or ground whole wheat with water and a small amount of finished compost, letting it ferment for a few days until it becomes actively bubbling and fragrant, then diluting it and watering it into your garden beds. This inoculates your soil with an explosion of hungry, active microbes along with a food source to keep them thriving. This technique works beautifully when transplanting seedlings or preparing beds for hungry crops like tomatoes, squash, or corn that benefit from high biological activity in the root zone. Don't discount flour entirely, though. Its rapid response makes it perfect for situations where you need quick microbial action, such as breaking down fresh wood chips or kickstarting a new compost pile. Sprinkling a bit of flour on fresh carbon-rich materials helps bacteria colonize them faster, speeding up the overall decomposition process. Rice can be valuable as a slow-release carbon source in situations where you want sustained but gentle microbial feeding, such as in perennial beds or orchards where you're building long-term soil health rather than pushing for rapid growth. The beautiful thing about this knowledge is that it opens up endless possibilities for experimentation in your own garden. Try comparing barley to oats, or, experiment with adding different grains to specific areas of your garden and observing how your plants respond. Pay attention to soil texture changes, earthworm activity, and plant vigor. Every garden is unique, with its own microbial fingerprint and specific needs, so becoming a soil observer and experimenter will serve you far better than following any rigid formula. Remember that building living soil is a journey, not a destination. Each time you feed your soil microbes, you're investing in a system that becomes more resilient, more fertile, and more productive. The microbes you're nurturing today are creating the conditions for extraordinary plant health tomorrow, next month, and next season. This isn't just about this year's tomatoes, it's about building a legacy of soil health that improves with each passing season. If you found this deep dive into soil microbiology as fascinating as I have, please subscribe to the Living Soil Lab so you never miss our experiments and insights into what really makes gardens thrive. Share this with your fellow gardeners, especially those who are ready to move beyond surface-level gardening and dive into the incredible world beneath their feet. Together, we're building a community of gardeners who understand that the secret to phenomenal plants starts with feeding the soil's invisible workforce. Let's keep exploring, experimenting, and growing together.